Frank Eyck was a professor of history at the University of Calgary. He was a German Jew who in 1937 was sent by his family to England to escape from the Nazis. The rest of his family managed to escape a couple of years later and got out of Germany. His father was Erich Eyck, who's a well-known German or historian of Germany. He wrote the classic text on the Weimar Republic. Erich had been a lawyer in Berlin who became a city councillor in the city of Berlin, and then the Nazis came in, and of course he could no longer be city councillor and he could no longer practice law, and he took up the craft of writing history. And that's what he did when they got to England. And Frank has written his autobiography in this book, which was finished off by his wife. He died before he got it finished, but he got all the notes and everything done, and his wife, Rosemary, brought it together and got it published. What makes it interesting is that Frank went to England as a schoolboy. When the Second World War came along, he was immediately classified as an enemy alien. And so he was sent to the Isle of Man with other Germans, along with other Jews too, but German Nazi sympathizers were all in the same camp together. And Frank talks about these experiences. And this, again, it's rather like talking about Gandhi. He gives a different view of how we think about the Second World War, about Germany and about Judaism, because Frank points out that some fairly prominent English Jews were very sympathetic to the Nazis. And even some German Jews who were in the internment camp thought that basically what the Nazis were doing was simply reasserting a pride in being German. Now, of course, this was before the Holocaust, and very often when we read German history or when we look at the Nazis and we think about religion, we think of it in terms of the Holocaust. But if you put yourself into 1939, the Holocaust was still in the distance. Jews had been persecuted, but they hadn't been murdered on the mass scale that took place in the Holocaust. So Frank's book is important for putting a perspective on this, and then it's important as a pilgrimage because when he's in the Isle of Man, eventually the British realised that they got all these Jews locked up with Nazis, and that didn't quite work, and they released them and they allowed them to join the British Army. So he joined the British Army, and initially they put them in the Pioneer Corps, which was sort of doing the basic grunt work, and then they realized that they were too good for that, and many of them went into British intelligence. In fact, when I first went to the University of Calgary, there were 3 German Jews, or former German Jews, at the university teaching, all of whom had been in British intelligence during the Second World War. And all taking a different view of how things worked out. And Frank went into intelligence. He writes in his book about creating what they call black propaganda to send back to Nazi Germany to demoralize German troops. After the Normandy invasions, he worked in interrogating German prisoners. He then, after the war was over, helped set up a major German newspaper in Flensburg in northern Germany. One of the fascinating things in Frank's book, which he records at the end of the Second World War, he spent 6 years in the British Army fighting against the Nazis. He then is demobbed and he goes back to Oxford to be a student. And then he gets a letter. He's got to report to the local police station as an enemy alien. And he goes to report to the police station, and he reports to a police sergeant and says, well, you know, he's been in the British Army for the last 6 years. And the guy says, how could you possibly fight against your own country? And Frank said, you know, this is the bizarre nature of it, that he was someone who was in the army for 6 years, and then he's regarded again at the end of the war as a German and not British. And so he's had to write to the Times, and he and various other Jews in Britain experienced the same thing. I mean, it wasn't just Frank. All these Jewish soldiers who fought in the British Army, once they were demobbed, they reverted to being Germans. And therefore, they had no right to live in England. And so they had to fight for it after the war. And this is, again, one of these things that we don't know about, that we've forgotten, and how crazy often human beings can be. And he writes all about these experiences as a Jewish, a Jew of German origin, saw the war and saw religion, and he weaves in and out of it religion, including the fact that 2 days before he went over to Normandy, after the Normandy invasions, he became a Christian, and he was baptized by a Methodist minister. And then he talks about his pilgrimage as a Christian Jew, not a Messianic Jew, as many people are familiar with in North America, but as a Christian Jew. And what's remarkable about this is, I think, that a large number of Jews from the time of the Enlightenment in Germany became Christian. And they became some of the leading Christian scholars. Neander, the great German church historian, was Jewish. Stahl, who was the great theorist of Christian political theory, was Jewish. Stahl influenced someone that many people may know about in North America, Abraham Kuyper, for example, the Dutch Christian leader who became prime minister. Kuyper was very closely associated with a group of Dutch converts, Dutch Jewish converts, de Coster and others, who became Christians. He was also influenced by Stahl, who was a German convert to Christianity. So there is this tradition of converts to Christianity who are Jewish, who made a major contribution to modern Christianity. And we forget about this today. Things have got a little bit, I think, distorted when we look at the history of the interrelationship between Jews and Christians. And it's more complex. And so I think Frank's book is an important book because it brings out a lot of this complexity, because he remained very much Jewish in his thinking, very proud of his Jewish heritage. And yet at the same time he was a Christian, but not in a crude sort of Christian way. A very sophisticated historian who wrote an excellent book on the role of religion in German history. So this is why I think it is an interesting book. It's a sidelight on things. I don't discuss it actually in my book, Understanding World Religions. But when we think about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, I think we've got to think in terms of complexity again.